Welcome to another episode of LexCon Crypto. I am your host, Andrew Hemingway, and in our virtual studio today, we have our executive producer, Alex Talcott, and our esteemed guest, Jamiel Sheikh. Today's episode is all about CBDCs. It's a huge topic, and so we had to bring in a big guest to help us tackle it. Jamiel is a founder, CEO, author, professor, and educator, community builder, board member, event holder, and MMA lover. Founder and CEO of Instamint, a B2B NFT DAO minting API platform, which is his primary focus. He's also the founder of Chainhaus, a blockchain DeFi advisory and education company, operator of Blockchain 101, an online blockchain education portal, and founder of the central bank digital currency think tank, which consists of central bankers, banks, academics, and runs the CBDC Insider. And Jamiel, we are honored to have you with us today. Obviously, your expertise around CBDCs and just really a blockchain in general really sets you apart in this conversation. And so I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come on the show with us.
Thank you, Andrew and Alex. It's an honor to be here. So thank you for inviting me.
Now, there's obviously a lot of conversation today around crypto regs and just the development of the whole space. The collision course, I guess, of innovation and regulation is something that is constantly occurring. But unique to the conversation around crypto, as far as other technologies is concerned, is this conversation which has sort of come into terms of the CBDCs. And wondering, Jamiel, based on your experience, could you just give us a little bit of a rundown and help our listeners to sort of understand just at a base level when we talk about CBDCs throughout the show, what exactly we're talking about?
Sure. So CBDC stands for Central Bank Digital Currency. And what it is still currently evolving, right? So the definition of it is that it's something issued by the central bank that is digital, typically maybe a token. It is the digital equivalent of fiat cash or money, and that's where we really can end. We can't really go beyond that in terms of defining it because many different countries and many different organizations are looking at it from very, very different perspectives, and that's part of the innovation and creativity that we're going through. So the only thing that's common across the different implementations and interpretations of what a CBDC is that it's something that's issued by the central bank, as opposed to, let's say, issued from a decentralized point of view, and there's no real issuer, an algorithm issues it or a smart contract issues it. So that's really what is really consistent in the definition, and it's important to understand that that definition is evolving. And we're still trying to figure out what does it actually really mean.
Thank you for that, Jamiel, because I think for boomers out there who might be uncomfortable with crypto, they might also be uncomfortable with CBD, cannabis oil. They probably think CBDC is some sort of, all those millennials with their with their reefer and their crypto. So this has nothing to do with that. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's funny that I've had people come up to me and said, "I didn't know you were in the weed business." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" It's like, no. I think you misunderstood.
Yeah, don't you love that? My bad joke is actually reality. There we go. That's where we're at, man. Brave new world.
It's funny. So when we think about the idea of a digital currency issued by a central bank, is this? It seems at total odds with the idea of decentralized finance or DeFi. Like the two seem to clash. How is it that these worlds are operating together today? And is it just sort of a discussion at this point?
There's a lot of discussion right now, and I wouldn't say that the two are entirely mutually exclusive. If you look at, for example, some of the work that the Bank of Kazakhstan has done recently, they've talked about how a CBDC and DeFi might work together and interoperate. It's entirely possible, theoretically speaking, that a central bank takes MakerDAO code, like this code that for DAI, they fork that code, maybe they modified it a little bit, and they launch it, and they basically have the equivalent of a stable coin. and that stablecoin transacts in a decentralized manner, but it started and created and issued by the central bank. So, what exactly the central bank implements and pushes out to the market is really wide and open, and is being explored right now. So, I think we're in the early stages of it. What a stable coin is, and what a stable coin isn't is still not very, very clear. You have Circle, for example, USDC, which is centrally issued, but it's used everywhere in the crypto world. I store my crypto. I'm not in a crypto. I'm moving it to USDC. Why can't I move it to a more risk-free asset like the central bank issued CBDC if I'm going to use a stable coin to maintain my reserves? So I think there's a lot of misinformation between CBDCs and DeFi. They're not. There's a false dichotomy that it's either or, right? And I think we'll see in the coming years some of this stuff converge and merge. There's talks about how to have CBDCs be traded on a stablecoin swap like that exist in the market right now, like Curve Finance. How can I swap? And you basically have an FX market. So these early days, and we're going to see the intertwining of the two.
Right. Now, the necessity for a stable coin in the larger legitimate crypto market is interesting, and tied to that, the rapid growth of the crypto market and the accumulation by the crypto market of fiat dollars to back their non-fiat currency is really what is, I think, perhaps driving a lot of this. I think regulators are nervous that the volatility of the cryptocurrency market will destabilize the traditional fiat market. There seems to be a lot of tension between those worlds. Do you see the CBDC as fitting in nicely as a government backed with reserves, as you were saying, a less risky stable coin that would be used to underpin the overall crypto market? Is that sort of how you see these two things evolving?
Yeah, I think governments will support stable coins. It's private money, and they will regulate it. I think we're moving towards regulation of stable coins, and I think we do want stable coins in the market. We want it as an option. CBDCs will be an option, right? But right now, if I go to the corner grocery store and try to buy milk, they're not going to accept the USDC. If a CBDC was rolled out, most likely all vendors in that country would accept that CBDC, right? Because they're legal tender. So there are a number of issues. Stable coins, if they do collateralize, if they do have collateral, are not necessarily capitally efficient, right? If I'm going to issue $1 billion worth of stable coins, I have to park and hold $1 billion, right? And so I've tied up, maybe let's say the treasury market, and I've taken from the treasury market and I've tied up liquidity in the treasury market. So there was a Financial Times article on some of the negative externalities of stablecoins. And as much as we say that the central bank can create money out of nothing, and that is the case, they can create money out of nothing, there's an advantage to that, which is that they don't necessarily tie up any assets in the creation of that money, which might make that more efficient, right? I'm not necessarily saying it's a good thing. I'm just saying that there is another side to that story. So you have stable coins that consume assets and take assets off the market. I've got to take $1 billion of treasury, park it, and hold it, and then issue what is effectively the equivalent of it. So what's the issuing the equivalent of it, right? Just the modality and the mechanism of how what's being issued is different. It moves across borders more quickly, and it's more exciting in the crypto world. But effectively, I've done the same thing. And then a central bank can issue money and create money out of nothing, and it creates more money, right? Which is needed by an economy that's growing, right? More money is needed by an economy that's growing, and what better way to do it than mint it out of thin air, right? Which is basically what a lot of the cryptos are, right? It's coming out of thin air, right? So I think there's a couple of different sides to that, and I think that the research is still being done on stable coins and their implications, but there is no doubt that we are moving to completely adopt stable coins globally. Governments are going to adopt it and they're going to regulate it. The Federal Reserve is going to regulate the stable coins. There are recent comments around that suggest that will be the case. So I think we will live in a world, let's say 5 years to 10 years, there will be a plurality of different options of money. Just not just stablecoins, but also CBDCs and other possible things. And for me, I personally hold DAI, and I prefer to move to DAI or USDC depending on the situation. And if there was a CBDC, I would move to a CBDC just because it's lower risk.
Right, right. Yep, very good. I know, Alex, you had said you wanted to ask a couple questions.
Yeah, no, you know me, I'm a chronic interrupter, but it's been really been nice to sit back and listen to Jamiel. He has so much thought and so much to share.
Yeah.
But while he seems like he is a one-man think tank, I know that there is a CBDC think tank event that you have coming up in October. If you just want to name drop, who are some of the other bright minds who are going to be thinking alongside you at that event in DC?
Yeah, so we're fortunate to partner with the IMF on this, which is very hard to do. It's very rare to be able to get the cooperation of the IMF, but they like the work that we're doing. And so we have a full roster of individuals coming in to talk about that. My partner in crime with the think tank, John Kiff, brilliant mind, was at the IMF, has retired, but carries this massive amount of knowledge. And he'll be coming in and speaking about CBDCs. And then we have several different people from the IMF coming in and speaking, Ashley Landquist and Hervé Troop. They're all coming in, and they've been working on multiple CBDC projects across multiple countries, and they're advising. And so we're going to pull in some of that knowledge. The CBDC Summit is actually 2 days. The first day is a master classes. We have these long form educational lectures, and the second day is these lightning talks, which focus more on the cutting edge of digital currency and not necessarily just CBDCs, right? So how do you do offline payments? If I have a digital currency and I'm out in the farmland and there's no connectivity, and how do I transact with you? And so we're having a bunch of people come in and talk about that. They're academics, they're practitioners, and to talk about that. And I think it's going to further the conversation. We have central banks coming in, with the Bank of Canada, Bank of England, the Bank of Kazakhstan coming in to talk about the work that they're doing. And it's really a place to share information and learn and grow. I plan to sit there and just listen and learn. And the whole reason I put it all together is so that I can learn from these bright minds. And we really pick some of the best people to come and talk about it. We have dissenting opinions, and I include those dissenting opinions. We want opinions that kind of not necessarily are in harmony with each other. We want opinions that kind of have a little bit of conflict and differences. And so we do have people coming in and talking about stable coins. We do have people coming about and talking about the benefits of cryptos and the negatives of crypto. And I think it's just going to be the quality of the talks is going to be at a whole other level. Like on the 14th, we have somebody named Manmohan Singh from the IMF. You must bring him in. He's a whole other beast. He looks at it purely from economic point of view. And when he speaks, I have to record it because I have to go back and review it like 7 times, trying to really break apart what he's saying. And we're bringing him in as well.
Andrew and I are IMF World Bank nerds, even though we're country bumpkins up in New Hampshire and you're in sophisticated Manhattan and you're doing an event in DC. Bretton Woods Conference, 1944, Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, got us the IMF and the World Bank. So we have a little bit of state pride. We have more than just mountains.
Right. We have a little connection there, a little connection. So where could our listeners buy tickets or find out more information about that?
Yes, so go to cbdcsummit.com, one word. It'll take you to the ticket page. The tickets are very, very cheap. We're not interested in making money. This is not one of those conferences we're charging people thousands of dollars. If you're an academic, you can come in for $99. If you're in a commercial bank, or it's $200. And your 2 days is lunch. There's everything. You get to meet a fantastic group of people. The networking is going to be stellar. And so it's really we don't care about the money. We're not a conference organization. We're more about let's have conversations, let's learn, and let's grow, because the the human civilization is at stake here, right? Like, all this about money and things like that, it ties into financial inclusion, ties into the growth of any country, right? And this human civilization is at stake here, and so therefore we must have those conversations. We have no sponsors, right? So there's nobody sponsoring the event. If you look at some of these other CBDC conferences, there's a sponsor, and that sponsor's on every panel, and they're talking about their product. And we don't allow that. Like, we don't want anybody coming to sell anything. We want thought leaders talking about what they're thinking, and we want them to meet each other and exchange information, so that we can all benefit as a society and as a civilization, so we can move forward.
The other thing I was curious about in checking out CBDC TT, as in thinktank.com, is your open CBDC sandbox. What's the status of that? It looks like earlier this year, you made available to official institutions the experience of what 1.2 million transactions per second feels like. What is that trademark sandbox that you have?
Right. So the sandbox is really a user interface into something that the Boston Fed and MIT has built. So the Boston Fed and MIT have this project called Project Hamilton, and what they did is they built a CBDC platform that's, one, open source, two, is something that is now community driven in terms of where it goes. The problem with the software, well, actually, there's no problems with the software. It's some interesting stuff. You've got some bright minds. You've got people from the Bitcoin community that are contributing into that. You've got somebody named Madars, who is the co-founder of Zcash, contributing to that platform. The issue with that platform is that it's pure server-side code, and mostly non-technical people will never be able to access it. And so what we're adding is kind of this user interface where you can play with it, you can create an account, you can issue tokens, you can transfer tokens, and that is a tool for central banks and other organizations to start to understand. And their transaction rates are very high because it's not decentralized. It's a centralized system, but it borrows heavily from the blockchain world, something called UTXOs and things like that. It borrows that because you have guys from the Bitcoin world that have contributed to that, and it allows for the kind of massive transaction rate.
And the user interface on top of that, of course, is the contribution by the CBDC think tank. I
Right.
think
So
it's
we're building that. I actually just bought a Vietnamese dev company 2 months ago. 80 developers are heading out to Vietnam tomorrow morning, actually. And so the development of the front end piece is being done there. And we'll hopefully roll something out within about 2 months, to the institutions that can start to play with it.
Yeah, no, that'd be amazing. Now, there's obviously as we talk about CBDCs, there's a lot of opinions, of course, and there's, as you had said, a lot of work being done from a regulatory side, both at a global level, at a nation state level. There seems to be a lot of discussion, but there's also a lot of discussion coming from the general public. And one of the ideas or concerns that is being raised is around privacy and around surveillance when it comes to CBDCs, and maybe it even resolves itself in that sort of idea of like individual liberty, and some people see CBDCs as another step forward from a government's perspective. And would you just kind of talk to us about the reality of that, or kind of how those things are being shaped?
Right. So it's definitely a concern. Throughout history, we've seen governments destroy privacy and invade, citizens' privacy. So there's plenty of literature around that happening. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that will definitely happen in the situation of the CBDC. Right. There is, I think, a whole set of outcomes or different scenarios that can play out, and that remains to be seen. There's an enormous amount of misinformation. You have people, for example, Anthony Pompliano, the Pomp, wrote a blog and said CBDCs are evil. I've been called a Marxist and a communist and all kinds of stuff. And I've asked, well, let's maybe it's true. Tell me how. How am I that? Tell me how Marxism works and things like that. And so there is this concern, and I think it's a valid concern. We must be concerned. The fallacy though is that people are saying that will be the case, and that already is the case, and we don't know that for sure because a CBDC doesn't exist in the U.S. There is no CBDC. So how can you say that it's a surveillance token? If you look at some of what the facts are, number one, central banks don't care about knowing about who you are. They don't really care. It's not part of their mandate. It's like saying you need to know what the grocery store at the corner, what their revenues are. You don't really care, right? You just want to make sure you can get your groceries, right? You don't really care that they're making this much money today or that much money tomorrow. It's not really part of your mandate, and so central banks don't really care. And at the same time, we are, as a society, giving up an enormous amount of data up to social media. We're volunteering an enormous amount of data. So our concern is really kind of misplaced, right? I think it really needs to be placed on other platforms that are, in fact, invading our privacy, like TikTok and things like that, which are taking a lot of our data, surprisingly an enormous amount of our data, and putting it in the hands of other countries. I think, if somebody says, well, CBDCs are a surveillance token, I basically say to them, well, one is like, and they're typically Bitcoin maximists. I'm like, do you understand that the Bitcoin ledger is open? Like anybody can see it. And so the minute I can infer who you are, the minute I use it at a retail location, my identity is disclosed. And therefore all my past transactions are disclosed. I mean, surveillance is easier on Bitcoin and an open ledger than it would be with a CBDC. Right? Not only can governments surveil the ledger, so can private citizens. Right? So there's an enormous amount of surveillance as possible on an open ledger. If I use Bitcoins let's pick up some milk, that retailer that's selling me the milk now knows who I am, right? Because I'm going to use my Bitcoin account theoretically. It's easier to now. Like I see my address, I see the person's address. I can now look up their transactions and do all this analytics, right? So I think there's a lot of factors that have to be taken into consideration to determine whether the CBDCs are a surveillance token or not. And what does that actually mean? If I hold a Venmo account, I have a Venmo account, Venmo knows all of what I'm spending on, right? So am I being surveilled by Venmo or PayPal, which owns Venmo? And if I have cash, there is still residual biological stuff on cash, right? So if I give you $100 bill, I might leave some DNA on that money, or there may be some implications of some traceability there. So there's always traceability. And in fact, through a CBDC, it's entirely possible that it could be far more private than anything other digital money if the regulation is there to assure that, and there's auditing and all that. A CBDC can potentially be far more private than other types of money.
For what it's worth, Jamiel, I don't think you're a Marxist. If anything, I think it's more likely that you would start Marxist coin with 3 X's, because truth is stranger than fiction in blockchain.
Right. So, but it's fun. I like. It feels like I've done something right. People make those kind of accusations.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's interesting this idea of on-chain privacy, and obviously that's a huge topic, especially brought to the forefront by the SEC's action against Tornado Cash. And do you and in combination with the KYC requirements for any business doing any type of crypto transactions, there's this requirement that you have to know who your customer is before you can even take any money from them at any level. So the idea of privacy in crypto today really is as a fallacy, I think, for the most part, unless you're using some of these services like Tornado Cash and others, where you're able to really start to mix and hide your identity. Is the movement by the SEC against Tornado Cash related to these conversations, or do you feel that's totally in the funding terrorism, AML world? Like, are they separate, or are they in fact joined at some point?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not deeply familiar with what's happening and the thinking behind the SEC's actions, or any organizations, government organizations, because there is typically a story underneath that doesn't hasn't really come out, right? So they're doing what they're doing because they have reasons to do it, and they may not necessarily disclose that, right? So, and this is not to say that we should just automatically trust them, but I think we're going to move to a world where KYC will be implemented for certain amounts and certain levels of movement of money, right? If I move $50, the KYC is not really going to be that critical. But if I'm moving larger amounts, then there is potentially a reason for it. Unless I'm buying a house, there's really not a lot of reason for a retail person to move $1 million here and there on a constant basis, right? Unless I'm selling something that I probably shouldn't be selling, right? So I think it's a debate. One of the things that we are going to be announcing, and we haven't told anybody, is a CBDC manifesto, right? Which is basically, it's going to be signed by a bunch of different organizations and academics and things like that. Which, one of the first things that we're going to state is that a CBDC must protect privacy, right? But there is a delicate balance, as everybody knows, between privacy and being able to fight crime. And so I think what that balance looks like is what an enormous amount of work has to be done. Some countries, for example, China's their digital currency, their CBDC, their privacy is done by saying, hey, if you spend under $5,000 or whatever that number is, $3,000, we don't really need to know who you are. But that's not really a good approach. If I'm going to go buy a Lamborghini, I don't really want to have to disclose to anybody that I'm buying a Lamborghini, because that's going to be far more than a couple $1,000s. So it has to be a little bit more sophisticated. It may be based on the type of transaction. If I'm dealing with a known vendor, then my KYC as an individual may not be important. If I'm going to go to the grocery store and pick up $400 worth of grocery, then my KYC in that situation may not necessarily be needed for a CBDC. So I think how that delicate balance between privacy and being able to detect if there's a nefarious activity is still being developed, and people are still figuring that out. And it's not a done deal yet.
The conversation about China, I'm glad you mentioned, because obviously the digital yuan is I think for all intents and purposes the first in use of a sort CBDC. I think that there's potentially some discussion around whether it qualifies totally, but it seems like it is a digital currency that is in use. How do you think China has done with that? How do you think that it's being adopted and used? And have you heard any conversation from like an IMF perspective on how they are viewing China taking this
Yeah,
action?
sure. I won't speak on behalf of the IMF. I was there actually with the IMF on this past Tuesday. What I can tell you is one, if there is a threat to the dollar, it's that currency, right? The de-dollarization globally can occur through the Chinese ECNY. And it would probably occur, if it were to occur, is with their biggest trade partners. For example, Mongolia. Mongolia's largest trade partner is China. So it's entirely possible, not to say that this will happen, it's theoretically possible that China says, now you must settle your invoices using my digital currency, right? And also, if that happens, then it's a problem for U.S. hegemony, right? And so I'm looking at it from a U.S. hegemony point of view as well. Like, part of what we're doing, saying, hey, what are the geopolitical implications of not having a CBDC in the U.S.? And what are the geopolitical implications of other people having CBDCs? Does it change our global position, right? And that is something that we do need to have a conversation. Now, the Chinese, they've done phenomenally well in building their technology and rolling it out. They're at 250 million plus users right now, right? And what they do, they're doing some very unique things. First, they've acquired a lot of technologies, and they've gone into different vendors and said, hey, we want your technology. We're not going to tell you what we're going to do it. We want an exclusive license, or we want a perpetual license. And they take the technology and they don't tell the vendor what they're going to do with it. They pay the vendor and they absorb that technology into their platform. They've started, that's one. Two, they've started very, very early. They started around 2014 and kicked the tires. And what they do is they do um, a ton of experiments, right? So they're experimenting things and then they roll out and they do iterations. Now, the scale of what they've done is significant. In order to have 250 million people have wallets, MetaMask doesn't have that. Right? Nobody has that. You must have a massive operation. You must have, support center. You must have a large number of developers, cybersecurity experts. So we can only imagine the scale of their operations, right? It's not insignificant. And here we are in the rest of the world trying to figure out if this can happen. Very trivial, like we're caught up in very trivial debates. So they've done a lot of really good things. We have to look at what they've done, learn from it, and understand where this is going. They're not going to stop. They call their program a pilot, but it's not really a pilot, right? It's like Google saying this is beta software and it's beta for 10 years, right? So they're taking that risk management approach. And actually at the CBDC Summit, we do have a professor from university in China, from Zhejiang University, where I actually teach at also, coming in and talking about the ECNY. He has a relationship with the People Bank of China, and has built a platform called eCurrency, and left that and is just in academia 100% of the time now, coming in to talk about a deeper dive into the Chinese digital currency. It is a CBDC. It uses the UTXO technology from Bitcoin, but it's centralized. It's a hybrid. It's hugely scalable. The other interesting thing that they do is they do scenario testing. They have hundreds of thousands of scenarios that they test. Okay, this guy from this province wants to buy an airline ticket and do a hotel booking all in one transaction. They test that scenario. So they're doing what's kind of like what's akin to a Monte Carlo simulation, right? And they're doing all these kind of testing. And they're trying to find edge cases. Like where are these cases where things will break? Where are these cases where we haven't thought about? And they're pouring an enormous amount of resources to do these kind of scenario tests, right? The rest of the world is just figuring out, you know, like should we even have a CBDC? And I think we do need to take this seriously, either from a hegemony point of view or from a competitive innovation point of view. One of the things that CBDCs can do is push the bar higher up so that the fintechs have to innovate even more, right? So it's entirely possible that I can take my Venmo money in my Venmo account and send it to my Zelle account directly because it's a CBDC, right? And I can potentially program the fact that I want to give my daughter $100 on her birthday, right? And just set it and forget it. And that programmability is transportable across different vendors. Once I
That's
program
akin
it,
to a government healthcare argument where it's, setting some minimum standards to push a private sector to up their game. Different people have different views about whether, you want to think about it as a zero-sum game, whether there are finite resources, whether that stifles innovation as opposed to encourages it.
right. I mean, governments are not great at creating a lot of innovation. We must admit that, right? They bungle it and things like that. But I think we need to get our act together. The U.S. needs to get its act together, and it is. And I think other countries are learning and growing. That being said, there's been some failures in the CBC world, right? There have been some countries, I'm not going to mention any countries, they rolled out CBCs. One, nobody's using them. Two, in one case, it failed. The system crashed and was down for a month, over a month, right? And that's not acceptable for a central bank, because what's important is the confidence in a central bank. If that erodes, then you can have a big problem. So it's important to kind of absorb what all these other countries are doing. China, in many ways, is leading in terms of adoption, and to see how they're doing it. And we spend a lot of time studying the Chinese digital currency.
Do you think that it's possible that the Chinese also are seeing their not even just saying you have to settle with us, which of course their economic strength is so significant that certainly that could tip the scale in favor of their currency. But do you think that they also have insight of essentially mandating that other countries would even use their currency? Meaning, could you see a place where the CBDC from China becomes the standard currency of Mongolia? Given a digital format, you would imagine that's much easier to implement than it would be in a fiat world. Is that something that you think is on the horizon, or would Mongolia issue sort of
Or
their
Africa,
own
a place
backed
where there's
by?
been, or a place like, somewhere in Africa where they've helped build railroads, or done some goodwill of some kind.
Yeah, yeah. And so we do talk to some of these countries, and they believe that that will not happen. However, we don't think China. I don't think China will say you must use this currency. What they will say is, and this you see this happening with Russian oil, right? Um, they will say, well, you need to settle our debt in this currency, and it will be denominated in the ECNY, right? And that's not a mandate, that's influence, right? They're being able to influence that because they have the right to say, well, you have to settle in this currency or we're not going to lend to you, right? So I think we'll see some of that in the future. And that it, like the way that China works, they think 10 years out, they think 20 years out, right? They move with that mentality of like we don't need to rush and push things today. We can build and create that influence and then slowly move stuff, like push our weight around slowly. They'll move their weight around slowly. And so from 10 years from now, we may look back at this opportunity that we had today and say, hey, we should have done a CBDC because now we have this massive de-dollarization problem. If China de-dollarizes the USD, we as a country are in big trouble, right? We'll have this massive glut of dollars, and that's not a good scenario, right? So I'm looking at it from as an American, I'm looking at it from that point of view. I have to have that little bit of bias, and from that point of view, that if that were to happen 10 years from now, uh, we could end as this country cannot will be something that we don't recognize, right? We'll go backwards significantly. So, but that being said, people are addressing this and they're looking at it and they're fighting it. One of the reasons we're doing the CBC think tank is to really get the message out there that if there is geopolitical consequences to this, that this must be talked about now, as opposed to 5 years from now when it really is very hard to catch up.
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, we've reached the almost 40-minute mark. This has been a really wonderful interview, based just even on the last comments which you just gave. I want to thank you for the work that you're doing and trying to elevate this conversation. Obviously, it's a important one for the future of our country in the U.S., but also I think globally it's a extremely valuable conversation. So I appreciate your willingness to come on a new show and to give us your time and thoughts and attention. It's been really valuable, and I just want to say thank you very much for your willingness to do that.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and hopefully I can come back in the future.
Absolutely, definitely. Thank you so much.